Welcome to today's webinar, focused on making essential digital communications inclusive and accessible. During today's session, we'll discuss why in this time of increasing uncertainty and change, web accessibility and inclusive marketing is more important than ever before. We'll be chatting with our speakers about the case for building accessible and inclusive websites and digital campaigns, and giving you some practical tips on how best to do this. First off, some housekeeping. So I'm Donna Thompson and I will be your host on behalf of TextHelp for today's session. Hopefully you're all connected to the webinar okay. You can hear my voice and you can see the slides. If you're not familiar with the GoToWebinar software, you should see a little panel on the right-hand side of your screen that looks something like the one displayed on the slide now. In here, you can control your audio settings. As an attendee, you're on listen-only mode so that everyone attending can have a good listening experience. We encourage you to ask questions though, whether it's about the material being presented or a technical issue that you may experience. You can submit them to us at any time throughout the presentation using the questions section on the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll be monitoring them as we go along. Today's webinar will be recorded and we will be sharing the recording and the slides with you early next week. So if you'd like to talk about today's session, or if you think of any questions after the session has finished, you can reach us on the Twitter hashtag you can see on the slide now. That's hashtag GAAD-webinar. Okay, so let's introduce today's panelists and get on with the show. So as I said earlier, I'm Donna Thompson. I'm Marketing Manager here at TextHelp. And as you'll find out during this webinar, I'm passionate about digital inclusion, accessibility, and enabling inclusive online user experiences for everyone. My vision is a digital world where no barriers exist and where everyone can participate fully and independently, regardless of ability. We'll also be hearing from Robin Christopherson, Head of Digital Inclusion at AbilityNet. After studying engineering at Cambridge University, Robin worked as an IT instructor for the Royal National Institute for the Blind before becoming a founding member of the UK tech charity AbilityNet. So AbilityNet specialise in advising individuals on assistive technology, delivering workplace assessments, and helping clients to design attractive websites, software and apps that are easy to use by all. So Robin will be offering listeners some practical advice on building accessible platforms in his presentation. Last but not least, we have Jennifer Pine, Brand Director at Radley Yeldger. So with a diverse background spanning consumer PR, advertising and corporate communications, Jen is passionate about building functional and emotional connections between people and brands. Specialising in purpose-driven marketing, her portfolio of work includes campaigns with global powerhouses like Unilever, Cargill, Coca-Cola and Ferrero. So Jen will be chatting to you today about Radley Yeldger's recent report, Demystifying D&I, and advising you on building inclusive comms that don't rely on outdated cliches and won't alienate your audiences. But before we hear from Robin and Jen, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about why we at TextHelp care so much about creating accessible digital experiences for everyone. It's our vision in TextHelp is a world where difference, disability and language are barriers to no one. We're absolutely dedicated to helping unlock everyone's full potential through technology. It's an exciting time for accessible digital tech, and there is so much we can do. So here at TextHelp, we help millions of people with disabilities all over the world every day through our software. At the last count, we had around 25 million users globally, and this number just continues to grow day by day. Making a difference really is definitely part of our DNA. And one example of our software, and probably the most relevant for today, is our digital inclusion toolbar, Browse Aloud. So you may have heard of it before, and if so, you'll know that it adds speech, translation, and a whole host of other really cool reading support tools to websites, making those websites easier to understand for people with dyslexia, low literacy, English as a second language, and mild visual impairments, for example. And just looking at recent stats, we can see that our usage has gone up by 50% since the pandemic. So we feel some comfort that our services really are helping web visitors to better understand the important information on our customer websites at this time. So as part of our work in this area of digital inclusion, we have helped to create inclusive digital experiences for many organisations across multiple industries all over the world. Some organisations you might recognise: Canon Recruitment, Ontario Library, another one in Canada, the Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments. In Ireland, for example, we work with the Broadcasting Authority. In the UK, hundreds of NHS organisations, and of course hundreds of councils all over the UK, US, Canada and Australia. So overall, we're helping thousands of businesses make their online and digital information available to all their potential users, regardless of an individual's ability. So in this time of increasing uncertainty and change, accessibility and inclusivity is more important than ever. And as we journey through this global pandemic together, we know that keeping your customers up to date is a top priority for you right now. We've seen organisations take steps to limit travel, cancel or postpone face-to-face appointments, and replace in-person events with virtual ones. So it's important that the information you produce online can be accessed, and understood by every website visitor. So why should we care about web accessibility? Why does it matter? Well, let's take a look at the facts first. According to recent research, 15% of the global population has a disability. And what does this mean in numbers? Well, it means that over 13 million people in the UK are disabled, and globally it's 1 billion people. So that's a lot of people who potentially can't read your updates, understand your articles, or use your website. So let's take a closer look at who make up this group of 1 billion people. The more than 285 million people across the world are estimated to be living with sight loss and visual impairments that are severe enough to have significant impact on their daily lives. This group of 285 million people will absolutely struggle to browse the web like you and I might be able to. Think about the small fonts you come across, or the walls of text with no clear paragraph breaks or headings, or the lack of captions on videos or alt tags on images. Think about your own website. Are there areas that you could improve to make it easier for everyone to access? Moving on to the wider umbrella of people with neurodiversities. Did you know that 1 in 7 people are neurodiverse? This includes attention deficit disorders, autism, Asperger's, dyslexia and dyspraxia. It means that 1 in 7 people may be distracted by the audio or the video noises on your site, or struggle with the use of fonts and the contrast between images and text. Those with dyslexia, for example, may not be able to understand the complicated sentence structures or the use of jargon, which can be particularly overwhelming. Taking a look at literacy levels, the average American adult reads at 8th grade level, and over 67 million people in America speak English as a second language. In the UK, the average reading age is just 9 years old. So to give you some context, The Guardian has a reading age of 14 and The Sun has a reading age of 8. Also, 8% of people in the UK speak English as a second language. So these folks really may struggle to understand your content, especially if it uses complicated text or jargon, or is presented in the walls of text I've already referenced, as opposed to smaller bite-sized paragraphs. So all of these groups of people that I've just talked about are protected by legislation such as the ADA, that's the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the Equality Act in the UK. So this legislation states that service providers must not discriminate against disabled people. And your website is considered a service, so by law, it really should be accessible to everyone. But the law aside for now, the benefits of creating accessible and inclusive online platforms are huge. The market of people with disabilities is large and growing as the global population ages. The global spending power of people with disabilities and their families is nearly $7 trillion. And in the UK, that's at least 246 billion every year. Is that an audience that you want to ignore? But most companies do, in fact, ignore that untapped market because research suggests that a massive 98% of websites fail to meet accessibility standards. And we're talking about websites from all industries, so retail, health trusts, local authorities, financial institutions. The problem is huge, but the solutions can be so easy to make and the benefits are more than worth it, which hopefully you'll recognise by the end of this presentation. So if your website isn't easy to use or accessible to people with disabilities or literacy issues, you really could be losing out on real revenue. In 2019, for example, more than 4 million people in the UK abandoned a retail website because of the barriers they found, taking their money elsewhere. 11% will speak to someone else about the problem, which of course could paint a very negative picture on your brand. Put simply, your competitors really could be winning out because of your poor accessibility choices. But if you address accessibility now, achieving market leader status in your sector is within your grasp. Some stats from the recent ClickAway Pound survey really stand out for me. They report that 80% of users with access needs feel accessibility is more important when making spending decisions than price. So these users aren't searching for the cheapest, they're searching for the easiest route to buy. Even more interesting is the fact that 82% of users with access needs would spend more online if there were fewer barriers. And 85% limit their shopping to sites they know are barrier-free. The problem is, you might not even know when you're losing customers. Only 7% of people with access needs will ever contact a website owner about the barriers they experience. This means a whopping 93% will be likely browsing straight to another website or finding a different source if you don't meet their needs. One of the final points I'd like to make is about the cost of transactions. It's well known that the cost of digital transactions is much lower than telephone or face-to-face conversations. However, if users experience accessibility problems on a website, more than 7% of them will phone a helpline for advice. Have you considered the cost savings your business could be achieving if you encourage users to self-serve rather than reaching out for support through your offline channels? Making your website accessible to all and driving customers to self-serve online offers 24/7 access to your services and information whilst delivering considerable cost and efficiency savings. The numbers really do speak for themselves. And I want to end by taking a step back and really reminding you that inclusive design helps everyone, not just disabled users. And one of the most well-known examples of this is Vint Cerf, a hearing impaired computer scientist at Google who was part of a research team back in the 70s. So the team were tasked with finding new ways to share documents without talking on the phone. And their 1981 network led to the creation of the sophisticated internet we know today. So in the process of implementing web accessibility practices, you're likely to discover and correct usability problems that were affecting all of your visitors. And you'll also be making it easier for mobile phone users to access your information from their small screens. And this really reminds me about the three Finnish engineers who invented SMS text messaging in the 80s. They figured out a way for deaf people to communicate with one another without speaking, texting instead. So what started out as an invention for the disabled community grew global legs when it was revealed that text messaging really presented a more effective solution for saving telecom bandwidth. Now, goodness, people text more than talk on their smartphones. In the US alone, smartphone users send and receive 5 times more texts than they make and receive calls. And over the last decade, the number of monthly texts sent has increased by more than 7,700%, a pretty popular invention. So back to websites specifically, accessibility improvements often lead to cleaner, more simplified website designs with easier navigation, content written in plain English, and other elements that work to improve the overall user experience. It can also improve SEO. You improve your user experience and your site will have lower bounce rates, higher conversion rates, less negative feedback, and other positive benefits outside of making life easier for those with additional needs. So I think at this stage you've probably heard enough of my voice for now, but I hope I've given you some food for thought about why accessibility and an inclusive approach really is needed now more than ever. So I'm going to pass you over to Robin Christopherson, who, as I said earlier, is Head of Digital Inclusion at AbilityNet. And he's going to give you some great insight and advice on how to create accessible websites and digital experiences for your own audiences. So Robin, over to you when you're ready.
Donna, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. Phew, there's a big delay there. I was talking to nothing there. So thank you very much. So yeah, really brilliant. I'm just going to follow on from where Donna has left off there, but with more of a personal perspective from the end user point of view, and also for myself as a blind user as well. So I think Donna's going to drive the slides, so apologies when I say next slide, that sort of thing. And I think a little bit later on, we're going to turn on the cameras so that you'll be able to see us for the Q&A, but so that our faces don't put you off looking at the slides at this stage. And your lunch will have had the time to digest by the time we turn on the cameras as well, so that'll be fine. If I speak too quickly, please do jump in, Donna, and let me know, because I know the Palantypist is doing his or her best to keep up as well, and I can talk quite quickly. So okay. I'm going to talk about, thanks, the importance of why we should decide to be digitally inclusive. We've heard a lot about the business case already, but let's talk some tech. So if we go on to the next slide. So we've got a very typical, probably quite dated looking PC here, and back in the 80s, with the advent of the personal computer, as we see here, everything changed for people with disabilities. Doors were opened. It really was a massive leveler when it came to helping people overcome particular challenges that they had. So it was because of a talking laptop. It was the size of a small suitcase and it cost an absolute fortune, but nevertheless that helped me get through my studies and, you know, make me employable. As we see here, we've got keyboard, mouse, screen. All of those things have loads of choices. There are dozens, if not thousands, of different keyboards out there that will help you, whatever your physical impairment might be. There's different kinds of mice. There's literally thousands of different kinds of mice that can help you, regardless of whether you have, you know, wrist pain or very sophisticated needs. You might need something like a joystick, for example. The screen there, you can make that as big as you like, or you could buy a bigger screen. You can change the colors on it. You can make the text larger. You can make the arrow pointer bigger or different colors. All of these different things. You can use magnification software. You can use speech output, which is what I have to use. And if you can't use any kind of input device apart from your own speech, then you can use speech input as well. And luckily, all of these things are becoming more and more sophisticated and more mainstream, often built into these devices as well. So the technology has been hugely empowering, but that's no good if the device that's in your hand, however inclusive it may be, is not going to be the silver bullet that you would require to access an inaccessible website or app, for example. So there really is this golden chain where every link needs to be in place, and if one link is broken, then, you know, it's people have to go elsewhere, or they're not able to, you know, spend that money, or they're not able to do that job or apply for that interview, etc. So this is hugely important. If we go on to the next slide. So I've mentioned about how important technology is, and, you know, everybody, I guarantee that everyone who's listening to this has got a smartphone in the vicinity of where they are, if not in their pocket or like right next to them on the desk or something. You know, we're absolutely wedded to technology. Imagine the love, and I'm assuming there's some love, maybe there's a bit of frustration as well, but imagine how important technology is for you. And then think about people with disabilities, and as I mentioned before, how empowering it is for them. It's not just, you know, a preference or a feeling of liberation. It's actual life choices and life opportunities that we're talking about here. So please, please don't think that people with disabilities aren't using technology, aren't visiting your websites, using your services, reading your digital campaigns, whatever it might be, they absolutely are. And in fact, people with disabilities are higher users of tech. There's a higher percentage of people that use technology on a daily basis with a disability, because that's the way that they operate. You know, I can't read printed paper, I can't, you know, see what's around me, so I use tech very extensively to do what other people might do in a slightly different way. If we go on to the next slide. So let's briefly talk about the guidelines. Now, you guys, I'm sure, know the score when it comes to what you need to think about, and they are very clearly laid out. We've got 3 examples here for web, for iOS, stroke macOS, and for Android as well. And they're so important, but they're also pretty complicated. And it's understandable when we've got a job to do, we need to create that Word document, we need to bang out that marketing campaign, we need to update the web page. You know, life is going at a breakneck pace, and I'm sure that even in lockdown, you guys are experiencing that still. Perhaps even more if your work is something to do with digital, and you know, when it comes to COVID-19, digital is hugely applicable. So I don't know about you guys, but we're even busier than usual. So life is busy, and these guidelines are complicated. Having said that, though, it's all about muscle memory. So taking on board these guidelines, obviously now today is not the forum for going through them in detail, but being able to absorb some of the core principles of them and turn it into muscle memory, so that you are able to quickly click on the accessibility checker, for example, that's built into every Office app before you send that Word document off to someone, or before you save that PowerPoint. So that is hugely, hugely useful, just something that you can do to get us that little bit closer to a more inclusive world. On the next slide, we've got a bit of a cheat sheet. So what we've got here, and apologies if it's not that visible, which is a little bit ironic, but there's quite a lot in this infographic. And on our website, AbilityNet, if you just search for Sculpt and AbilityNet in Google, then you'll get this page up, and you can get it, you can make it as big as you like. Control+ is a good hotkey. On every browser, I think, is supported to zoom in on a web page. But hopefully it's visible, and I think it is on our web page as well. Now, this is a brilliant infographic that Helen Wilson at Worcestershire County Council has done. She did it internally for her colleagues, but I came across it and thought it was good enough for us to flag here, but also to write a little post on our website about. It's primarily meant for people who are creating documents of all kinds, but I'm making no apologies for that, because that's the majority of people out there. They're creating Word documents, PowerPoints, PDFs, etc., and they're sharing them internally or externally, HTML email as well. But these principles, every single one, also applies to the web. So if you're a web person, then these apply to you as well. And these are above the code level that we're going to talk about here. So hopefully you'll find them intuitive, regardless of your background and, you know, whether you have to dabble in code on a daily basis or indeed ever. So everyone who's creating a document should take these on board, and it's quite a torturous acronym, but hopefully it will help. I thought it was good. So let's quickly go through it. Sculpt is S for structure. And it's so important for, as a blind person, I can't tell you how important it is that I can jump down and get a flavor of the main sections of a web page or a Word document or an HTML email just by hitting H to jump down through those headings. And ideally you'd have one H1 at the top, and then you'd have some logical child headings denoting the subsections of the page as H2s, and any kind of subheadings would be H3s under that. You get the picture. So headings are hugely important. Make them logical. A load of websites might just have one H1 and then they run out of steam, or many don't have any headings at all. The C is for color and contrast, and they're kind of, you know, the same thing. So whenever you use color, really do make sure that you are able to make them as contrastable as possible. And there is a ratio, there's a tool that you can download, the Color Contrast Analyzer. It's free. You can click on something. Oh my goodness. Sorry. And I need to tell this to go away. I'm so sorry.
Okay. You're all right, don't worry.
Okay. So I've made them go away. I've muted my phone, but not my watch. I rely heavily on my watch, but it would be lovely if in iOS, when you put your phone on sleep, then your watch mutes as well, but that's not that clever. So color, there is a color contrast analyzer that you can use to click on something to make sure that you've got the right color contrast, and that's really important for people with a range of vision impairments. Also, choice of color. There are a lot of people out there with a color blindness condition, red, green, blue, yellow, for example, and you really need to think carefully about that as well, and that tool can help with that too. But also, use of color. Color is really useful to be able to tell people you know, the different sections of a website. Some websites have different color-coded sections so that you know where you are. Use color to kind of break up blocks of text and to make the page more vibrant and easy to read, etc. The next one, the U, is quite a torturous one. So that's use of images, and that's about alternative text and making sure that your images are properly described, not great lengthy things, just a very succinct description. But also that you use images, you know, to back up text. There's a lot of people with literacy difficulties for whom having pictures to reinforce the meaning is incredibly important. L for links. Don't make, when you linkify a bit of text in the navigation or in the body of the text, please don't just say click here, for example, or more. I see that all the time, and that's because many people, like me, hear those links out of context. I would pull them all up into a great big long list, and I'm hopefully looking for something like contact us, so I start to type CON, and hopefully it goes straight to contact us, and not something which is click here to contact us, and the only bit that's been underlined is the click here. Or even if the whole thing was underlined, that still doesn't start with CO, it starts with CL, so I wouldn't see it either. So yeah, there's some thought, and just bearing these simple things in mind will make your documents and web pages infinitely better. P for plain English, and this is about simplicity of language. It's also about editorial. You really need to hack back any copy that was meant for the printed page. You need to cut it in half for the web, still obviously conveying the meaning, but really distill it down. And you need to cut it down by another half again if it's a mobile, you know, if it's going to be really mobile friendly. And that's one of the real powers of the smartphone, is that it has imposed a lot more discipline on developers, on designers, and on editorial to make sure that things are, you know, distilled right down to their essence, and you don't have to wade through loads and loads of spurious ads or links or you know, other unnecessary content. Finally, tables. Tables are hugely useful for data. Don't make complex tables that have, you know, spanning columns and that sort of thing. That's really challenging for me and for many other keyboard users, for example, to navigate. And please don't use tables to lay out the whole, particularly of your HTML email, but certainly not of your web pages. But that's thankfully almost a thing of the past. But HTML marketing emails almost always use tables to lay out those rather than CSS, and that's a real pain. If we go on to the next slide, I'll gallop through these last ones. So I mentioned about how important it is that mobile is considered, and it is so useful to have the technology with you wherever you go. And for people with disabilities, that's even more the case, because you've got the smarts of a computer with you all the time, plus a whole bunch of additional sensors that you don't traditionally or didn't used to get in a computer, so a camera, GPS, compass, accelerometer, etc. And believe me, all of those things are leveraged by some of the apps that people with disabilities use. All of the ones I've just mentioned are leveraged on a daily basis by me as a blind person, including the camera. And if anyone's interested, you can ask me about that in the Q&A a little bit later on. But mobile has brought its own challenges, because we're now well and truly, and have been for a decade now, in the age of extreme computing. So everything that Donna said earlier is totally applicable to disabled people, but guess what? Now they're applicable to every single user. Every single visitor to your website or user of your app has exactly those same requirements. So here we've got a lady squinting at her phone. She hasn't got a vision impairment. She might be a bit short-sighted. She might wear glasses, but anyone on a small shiny sheet of glass on a sunny day is going to struggle if the color contrast isn't sufficient, if the default font size isn't, or the font choice isn't good enough. So it's really, really important. So now everybody is someone that you are dealing, that you're catering for with inclusive design. And that's why we prefer to think of inclusion, digital inclusion, and inclusive design rather than accessibility, because accessibility has connotations of just being for disabled people, and typically a bolt-on exercise that you do potentially at the very last minute. Oh, well, we've got to check for accessibility, haven't we? We've got about the disabled customers, and by that point it's far too late, and it's going to be very, very difficult to retrofit, which is why we need to build in that muscle memory in just doing things slightly differently every single day. On the next slide, just not to belabor the point too much, but this chap, perhaps he's been waiting in the coffee queue. This slide was put together pre-lockdown, and he's been talking to his colleagues, and so he's got his cup of coffee, and now he's quickly doing something in the remaining time to book a ticket or to buy something on Amazon, whatever it might be. He's only got 2 minutes left of his coffee break, and he's doing it one-handed, so he's already temporarily motor or dexterity impaired, and he has exactly the same requirements about minimum tappable areas, not having controls too close together, etc., that somebody with a motor or dexterity impairment 24/7 would have. He might be on a bumpy bus or public transport where he's also being joggled around. If you're in a noisy environment, then obviously you're not going to hear, and a lot of people turn on YouTube's captions when they exist. There's so many reasons why every single user who doesn't have an impairment and doesn't even consider themselves as being impaired in any way is impacted and relies entirely on accessibility good practice in what they're accessing, because we're in the age of extreme computing. If we go on to the next slide, we're almost done. So I would be remiss not to mention the third age of computing, which is for the last 2 or 3 years now, the age of ambient computing, where you just talk to the air and it hopefully talks back and gives you useful information. This is a shameless plug for the Dot to Dot podcast, which I do every single day, about built-in features of the Echo or third-party skills that Alexa, oh, said her name, there's one right here, can do as well. And we're up to episode 1209 today without missing a day, and we haven't even scratched the surface. So by all means, have a listen to the Dot to Dot podcast, but please go away thinking that every single development, every new transformation of technology brings disabled people along with it. So now with smart speakers, the entry bar is so much lower. They're super affordable. There's no instruction manual. You can use them if you can't speak and if you can't hear, which you might think you wouldn't be able to with a smart speaker. Can't go into that now, but I can do it in the Q&A or offline. But you absolutely, regardless of whatever impairment you have, there is a version of the smart speaker to help you out as well. So that's really, really important. But how can you create accessible experiences on those platforms? That's something that AbilityNet is increasingly advising companies on too. We're going to finish off with something that is the epitome of evil. This is a capture, distorted capture code. They could very typically look like a number of pictures of road signs obscured by trees and that sort of thing. I'm sure you know what a capture is. Captures only appear online in important forms, and usually right at the end, when you've spent the last, in our case with a disability, up to half an hour filling out the form, and now the very last bit, if you're lucky, you'll get something which says, "I am not a robot." You'll tick that by hitting spacebar on it in my case, and half of the time it'll say, "Yes, you're not a robot," and the other half it won't, because you don't navigate the web page in the way that humans do, so we often fall foul of that. What I'm going to do now, guys, is get you all to do a tiny bit of work, and Donna can see how many attendees we have on the webinar, and she can also keep an eye on the chat thread. So what I'd like to do on the next slide, if we go to the next one, I want you guys to have a tiny little glimpse into the world of inaccessibility, which is the daily world for a lot of people with disabilities. So this is just a little screen cap of a page where you might see one of these captures, and there's often a wheelchair symbol for the audio version, which is a slightly odd choice, but that's the thing I would have to choose to hear the audio capture. And what we're about to hear is the audio capture. It's a real one from a real web page. It's real important because you have to crack it to be able to submit that form, to sign up for something, to buy something, whatever it might be. And it's not going to be easy, guys, but I want you guys to engage and really try your best. It'll be repeated twice. And what I'd really like you to do is get yourself positioned in that chat box, get that cursor flashing there before we start. And when you hear it, as I say, you'll hear it twice. I want you to do your best to type it in. And what we'll hopefully get at the end is loads and loads of responses, and we'll see if anyone has got the same as anyone else. Let's go for it.
Okay, I'll just get it loaded here. And I'll hit play.
9, 3, 7, 9, 11, 0, once again, 9, 3, 7, 9, 11, 0.
Hopefully there are some codes popping up in the chat boxes, in the thread. I've done this in front of rooms of 1,200 people, and I've asked people to jot it down on pen and paper or to put it on their phone, and then afterwards to put their hand up if anyone has got the same as a neighbour. So they would look at each other's and they would kind of compare, and nobody would put their hand up. I don't know if we've got any ones that are the same, but I've never ever had someone put their hand up. Now, even if two people got the same, it's not necessarily going to be the right one, is it? It's just, you know, and what we heard there is something that epitomizes what inaccessibility feels like. Just for 30 seconds of your time, you have entered into the world that disabled people inhabit on a daily basis. It's not all about capture, obviously. It's about unstructured documents, it's about poorly labeled links, it's about unlabeled images, etc., etc. But the feeling is what I want you to take away there, the dismay and the frustration when you actually need to use that thing to achieve what you're trying to achieve. And so, was there any responses, Donna?
Oh, there were lots of responses, and I'm really trying hard to see if there's any two that are the same. Lots of very different answers, as you can imagine.
I think
lots of
that
people,
speaks for itself.
Yeah, lots of people
They're
also
all
saying
different.
that they had no idea or it was very difficult. So yeah, I think that was a tough one for everyone.
Thanks very much, guys. I'm done. Sorry, I've gone horribly over, and I'll pass on. Sorry.
Don't worry, not at all. Okay. Let's just flick on, and we've got Jen's slides up now, Jen. So Jen, just whenever you're ready.
Yeah, can you hear me, Donna?
I can hear you perfectly fine.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you for that, Robin. I mean, that was super illuminating, and I think I probably speak for a lot of people in that, you know, you just feel embarrassed and you feel like a degree of empathy for having to deal with that. Those capture things are hard enough as it is when you don't have some sort of impairment, and then you've got this whole user experience that just is designed to make you fail. So I hear you. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to chat. You've kind of taken us through, both you and Donna, some of the like really technical elements of how do you get this right in terms of user experience. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the communication side because spoiler, it's not great either. And it's really hard because we know how important this topic is. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to talk about kind of the findings from a report we did a few months back into kind of D&I and the world of communication. So Donna, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll try and go quick. Right, so you guys know this. If you're on this call, you know this. D&I has really shifted from this kind of nice to have feel good marketing topic, maybe like 5-10 years ago, to something that's become really business critical. And there's lots of stats that back that up. If you want to go to the next slide. Right, so this is something that we see across all key audiences. So whether you're an employee, so more than half of employees think that their company should be doing something more to increase diversity. When you're looking at consumers, so 65% of consumers actually think diversity in advertising is really important, which, you know, it's something that you hear in different kind of marketing conversations with clients, like, yeah, we got to look diverse, but I don't know that that connection with the audience and those expectations overall are always clicking through. And then if that's not enough, when you think about from like an investor's perspective, for companies that are considered inclusive in terms of their employees, they see 2.3 times higher cash flow per employee. So those are pretty profound as it is. But on the next slide, I've got some even more compelling stats. And so this is really just about the financial business case for diversity and inclusion. So in the last 2 years, socially responsible investment, which includes kind of things that fit under the D&I umbrella and making sure you're being inclusive, grew globally by 34% to 30.7 trillion pounds, which is more money than I can get my head around. But in the UK alone, national SRI is expected to grow by 173% to reach 48 billion pounds. And so, you know, you think about these stats, and then if you want a really practical example, and I spoke about this a couple months ago, right after it happened, but Goldman Sachs's investment bank recently announced that they will not take any company public unless they have at least one diverse board member. Now, I have like some concerns about one diverse board member and what that means, but I guess the real takeaway here is when one of the biggest and most prolific investment banks in the world is saying we aren't going to invest in companies or take them public unless they make this a priority, like time's up on this being a nice to have topic. If you want to go to the next slide, Donna. So like all that said, the way that brands actually communicate about D&I is really, really bad. If you go to the next slide, you'll see what I mean. Sorry, the next slide after that. But basically, we saw a lot of cliches, and this is just a bit of a snapshot. If you're on this call, I would challenge you to tell me that you've never seen anything like this. So you see things like multicolors everywhere, regardless of the topic, even if it has nothing to do with the LGBTQ community. Hands, don't understand the hands thing, like hands up, hands in the ground, shaking hands, people kind of coming in for like a group powwow with hands, just hands everywhere, straight through to what we like to call like heterogeneously homogenous at work, which are these like stock photos of supposed employees, which are not only ticking every single diversity box that in terms of visual diversity, but they're all sort of like smiling and hanging out together and looking at the camera. So like stuff like this is everywhere, and it's something that we noticed a lot of. If you want to go to the next slide, Donna. Yeah, so we saw it everywhere, and we were like, this feels like it's a problem, but we wanted to find out a little bit more about why and how bad the problem was. So we did a bit of research. So we spent 6 months researching brands and kind of looking into how often we were seeing these cliches. We talked to 10 D&I experts from all kinds of different sectors to get their take, and we actually analyzed the Forbes 100 most valuable brands list, these are the biggest, you know, they correlate with the biggest marketers in the world too. So these are savvy brands who know what they're doing when it comes to marketing and communications. So if you go to the next slide. And while like the results kind of, we were surprised in positive ways a little bit. You want to go to the next slide, because there are some brands who are doing it really well. So I think to Robin's point, Microsoft has done a brilliant job of sort of marrying the business case for D&I with actually building something with utility. So they've created an accessible controller for kids with physical disabilities who want to play with everyone. I think from a kind of content perspective, Netflix has a great program which is all about trying to get more diversity both in front of and behind the camera and showing that content. There's some more examples in here. I don't want to spend a ton of time on them. The point I want to make here though is most of these are like quite consumery examples. An exception is Accenture, who is really attached their kind of gender goals and created a business case around it and really told that story really well. So overall, there's some nice stuff, but if you want to go to the next slide. Overall, the results were really, really bad. And I say it's a jungle out there because the good on the good side, almost 90% of all the brands we analyzed are actively trying to do something to communicate about their D&I efforts, which is great. It's great to see. However, about half of them are using cliches when they do it. And we're talking half of the Forbes 100 top most valuable brands. If you go to the next slide, we were trying to kind of like figure out why is that happening? Like what's really going on here? And we sort of came up with this term and we call it the self-fulfilling faux pas. And it's this thing where like brands are, they're trying to do something, they're trying to dip their toe, they're trying so hard to try and like get it right that they like inadvertently get it wrong. So we kind of defined that. We said it's a modern communications phenomena whereby the communicator tries so hard to avoid controversial or offensive statements that they inadvertently end up communicating in the exact tone deaf and or offensive manner they were trying to avoid. So it's almost like by kind of really trying and pussyfooting around the topic, you inadvertently sort of stick your foot in your mouth. And we have a film to share with you. My disclaimer on this film is that I don't even know if it's real, but it's hilarious and it really exemplifies this self-fulfilling faux pas problem. So yeah, Donna, if you could play the film, that would be great.
Yep. No worries. I'll just launch it here. Here we go.
Hi, my name's Marcus. I work at Robert Dias and I'm gay. I like going out with my friends and playing volleyball. I also like showing our gay and straight customers a funky range of our Christmas gifts.
Hi, my name is James. I'm straight and I work at Robert Dias. I like sailing, baking and showing off all our Christmas kitchen gadgets to our gay and straight customers.
I'm straight and I love shopping at Robert Dias.
I'm gay and I love shopping at Robert Dias.
I'm bisexual and I always find something I love at Robert Dias.
Look at this Christmas tree. It's perfect for a gay person or a straight person.
This drill would work a treat in a straight person's home or a gay person's.
Robert Dias, where gays and straights can buy drills and much, much more.
I still laugh every time I watch that video, even though I've seen it more times than I can count. And yeah, I really do think that it exemplifies, maybe in an exaggerated way, but kind of what goes on in general across the board with corporate communications when it comes to this topic. Next slide would be great. So what we were seeing this everywhere, and what we realized was like, we get it. This stuff is really hard. There's no real rule book for it. Like no one really knows where to start. So we decided we were going to make one. And we're calling it 10 principles for being inclusive by design. So I'm going to fly through these principles really quickly, but we have a much longer and more in-depth report that goes into kind of a lot of detail, practical examples, cool creative ideas, all of that you can download on our website. I'm sure you'll see a link for that later. Before we get into the principles though, I just wanted to like make one really clear point. This stuff, we know it's hard. We know that a lot of people and a lot of brands stumble over it and it might seem really difficult and complex, but if you really boil it down, when you talk about diversity and inclusion, all you're trying to do is reflect and connect with your audiences. And in fact, that's all that any good communication should be doing. So I just try and keep that principle front of mind and advise my clients to do the same. And that's kind of the viewpoint that we took when we put these principles together. So the principles you're going to see, yeah, they work great for D&I design and comms, but they really work for any kind of comms. So the first one is about moving away from multicolors. So yeah, try not to kind of think about rainbow colors for everything, especially if you're not talking about the LGBTQ community. Our advice really is to start with your brand identity and think about how to kind of communicate the message from there. Next one. Next principle is about showing real people in places. And so this is a specific point around photography and video content. So there's so much bad stock out there. Our advice is really to try and showcase the real people who you're trying to represent. So whether that's actually taking photos or taking video content of your employees, or trying to reach out to your customers or your consumers and feature them in your content, because nobody can really argue with that. Next point. And that said, and this is a really important point, and we make it in and outside of D&I comms, if you can't find suitable imagery, just don't use imagery. And this is sort of a revelatory point to a lot of marketers out there, but you do not have to use imagery to get across your point. You can use animation, you can use really sensible, smart, compelling text, you can use graphic devices, there's data visualization, which we'll come on to in a minute. There's so many other ways to get that across. The next point is just about avoiding ambiguity. So rather than talking in like platitudes about D&I as a collective, focus in on the specific issue that you're trying to talk about and your goals and the point you're trying to get across. And then data, embrace your data. So I get this question from clients a lot, which is, oh God, our stats aren't really good. Like we don't want to talk about it. And that is just the wrong attitude about it, because actually you can paint a really clear picture about the journey you're on by acknowledging and tracking kind of how far you have to go. And frankly, like if you've got problems in terms of where you're at with your stats and your representation or whatever you're trying to communicate, chances are your audiences have a sense of that anyway. So if you don't report it or you don't disclose it, it looks like you're trying to hide something. Principle 6, just don't overcomplicate. And that's a point about messaging and content, and sort of picks up on what Robin was saying about not too much text. It's also just about not making visual representations when you're talking about D&I too complicated. And that's not just because it doesn't look great or it's a mess, but it's because it becomes inaccessible. Or if you're someone with a neurodiverse condition, like you cannot take that information in. So just be kind of strong in what you're saying and make it simple and clear. And principle 7 is about get moving. So moving image and film are an amazing kind of way to communicate these topics. When you're trying so hard with visual, sometimes some humanity gets lost in the process. So really consider film. I guess the other point of this principle is don't feel like you're done. It's a journey. You're going to have to change. This agenda is changing day by day, and so you have to be prepared to kind of switch tact and style, and just be really humble and open to new ways of communicating. We've talked a lot about this. I won't belabor it. I think that Robin and Donna have done a brilliant job about painting the business case for accessibility in general. And in fact, that's what this sort of webinar is all about. But thinking about that from a design principles perspective, we've got lots of guidance in there that builds upon that in our longer report if you want to have a look. Principle 9 is just about bravery. So it's that thing, this is where the like self-fulfilling faux pas trap really kind of gets brands. And that's where you're like, oh, but our competitor's doing this, so maybe we'll use that kind of imagery too. Or actually, no, we don't want to go too far. It's like, if you're going to do it, go for it. Own it. Own where you're at. Use humor. Humor can be an amazing device when it comes to D&I, so long as you're not kind of punching down in terms of any kind of groups who might be marginalized or the minority groups. It's got to be about kind of looking at things from their perspective, but we would really encourage bravery if you want to cut through. And finally, don't make it interesting or sexy or, you know, really unusual when you're talking about D&I. It really needs to be about normalization. So frankly, in terms of disabilities, we heard some stats earlier. If you think about all the different intersectional buckets that sort of encompass D&I, everybody fits in probably multiple buckets there, which means it's normal. It's a normal everyday part of life. So it's just should be about normalizing that content in your communications. And so just thinking about like what do these principles look like in action, I wanted to share some work that we did for the International Labour Organization, who came to us several months ago and said we've got a real problem globally where there's a lot of discrimination against hiring people with disabilities. We need to create a powerful video that helps explain why that is the wrong approach. And so rather than like focusing on the disability, we decided to actually focus on talent. And we put together a film, which I will just let speak for itself if Donna can play it.
Yeah, no worries. I'll get it loaded up here. And play.
Kerry, I never knew you were mental.
She'll be very, very lucky if she can stack boxes in a supermarket.
He works with his lot.
I went to the cafeteria and I got a coffee and I was stopped by a woman and she said, "Can I pray for you?" And I said, "Well, I've already got my caramel latte, so I'm okay, thanks."
My teacher said to me, "Oh, you can't be an actor if you can't read."
The waiter came along, handed my mother the menu and asked her, did she want to read it to me or should he read it to me? I've got 2 degrees. I'm very capable of reading a menu.
She said, "Let's be honest here, Kerry, you're not dyslexic. You just went to a large state comprehensive school and had very bad education."
Disability is not the same as inability. I've represented my country at an international level.
My mind thinks outside of the box.
I got a BA Honours in Humanities.
Industrial engineering.
Social psychology.
I then pursued my master's.
Then I did postdoc in London.
Oftentimes, other people put the disability ahead of the person.
I would go into an interview and need to seriously outperform the people that I was up against.
Difference, it's just a difference. We are all human.
Basically, you treat disabled people the way you would treat anybody else.
I think of myself as a regular person who has dreams, who has ambitions, who happens to have a disability.
What do I call a disabled person? How do I refer to them? You call them by their name, ideally, you know?
Okay, thank you, Donna. I'm almost done.
We're grand, we're fine.
Right, so if you just want to click through a couple slides. Like I said, we've got a full report that goes into a lot more detail onto the stats that we uncovered, our advice, more practical advice around the principles, and actually some more cool creative ideas that we came up with on how to do this right. So it's really worth having a look. Go check it out. The URL is there. On the next slide as well, I'm not going to use the unprecedented times and sort of cliche that is everywhere right now, but we also have some really practical guidance around how to communicate against COVID-19. We're not going to tell you what to say, we're going to tell you how to say it. So we've got some resources on there as well if you want to have a look. And that's it from me. Thank you so much.
Lovely, Jennifer, thank you so much. And thanks to Robin as well. I think between the two presentations, there's certainly a lot of meaty help and guides and advice for our listeners to go away and you know, have a flick through and get some guidance on how to become more accessible for their essential comms. I'm conscious of the time. We have had some questions that have come through, so I think it would be nice to maybe stay on the line and answer a couple of the questions. For all of the questions that we don't get to answer live on the broadcast now, we will get back to you afterwards. So we will respond to you individually. But I think maybe if we switch our webcams on actually and people can get to see our faces, let's see if we can do that. Don't know if that's working, is it?
I can see you.
Oh, you can see me? Okay.
Yeah.
I just can't see the other screens for some reason. I've got too many panels open, maybe that's it.
Mine's on, I think.
Oh, great. Okay. All right. Well, I think just looking at the questions that have come through, Robin, I'll maybe start with you, if you don't mind. There's one that has come through. It asks, what quick tests can I do to see if my website has accessibility issues? You know, what are the things to look out for? So in terms of quick tests.
You could try resizing. Often a website has a text resize option. So I'm not talking about zooming in and out here because that's just like making the pages bigger or smaller. Actually changing the text size and see if everything scales up nicely. That will tell us that that text is separated from the page layout. You're using styles properly there. Use that color contrast analyzer tool that I mentioned. If you just search for color contrast analyzer and download that, then you can just click around on things and make sure that the color contrast is okay. Tab, use the tab key to go through the whole item, every item on a page. If you can't see the focus moving through the navigation and through the body links, then there's a problem for sighted keyboard users, and there's probably a problem for blind keyboard users like myself as well. And there are some free quick check tools. There's one called Wave, wave.org. You just go to that page, you type in a URL, and it does a single check of a single web page, and then it will give you lots and lots of errors, probably, particularly pages with JavaScript, because it can't tell whether JavaScript is accessible or not. It'll just flag them all up as warnings that you'll have to try and decide for yourself. It's not a straightforward process, which is why the web teams really need to kind of do the burden of the work, the lion's share. But visually, there's a lot you can do, the sort of things that I've mentioned there. But in documents as well, then you can run that accessibility checker that's always available in Office.
Great. Okay, that's super, Robin. Thank you. Another one here, maybe for yourself, Jennifer. What is the one piece of advice you would give to any marketer trying to communicate D&I for their company?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say is that I would challenge any marketer who would be really seasoned in doing kind of strategic marketing communications to treat the topic with the same emphasis and rigor as they would any other campaign with clear KPIs behind it, because that's all it really is at the end of the day. And I guess the other point to make is just start with your brand identity and work from there and make sure it aligns with your brand. That's always a good start.
Great. Okay. Another one maybe for yourself, Robin. So I'm pretty sure our website isn't very accessible, but I'm really keen to get better. What's the best way to start, and what should be my first step?
It really depends who's talking and whether they've got, you know, a web team behind them. If it's a solo person, then I would go to wave.org and do some of the things that I mentioned a moment ago. You can choose, if you're about to start a website of your own, then you could choose a platform that has better accessibility built in, like WordPress, as opposed to something like Squarespace. There are a lot of do-it-yourself platforms out there, and they are more or less accessible. But yeah, if you've got a web team behind you, then you absolutely need to get you know, buy-in at the higher level to make sure that there's the right resourcing put aside. Anyone in a web team will be able to get to grips with the web guidelines, for example. It would be, you know, straightforward to read those, to understand them, and to put them into practice. It will take a little bit more work, but as you go forward and build it into how you just do things normally every day, it won't be that much more by any means.
Great, okay. We're just losing you a little bit there, Robin, I think, in your sound, but I'll ask Jennifer maybe one sort of final question. Oh, you're back, you're okay. So Jennifer, D&I, oh, you're okay, don't worry. So yes, Jennifer, one question has come in. D&I is a really overwhelming topic. Where would you advise marketers to start or begin if they haven't done any D&I communications yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think the starting point is, what do you really want to achieve and what are your strategic objectives around that? I would always recommend that if you aren't collecting data on your D&I stats, whether, depending on the audience, whether that's kind of what the makeup of your organization is, where you're at on your gender pay gap journey, or, you know, in terms of sort of consumer engagement, kind of where are you at in terms of penetration and what are the challenges? Collect that first and do a bit of an analysis on the problem and where you want to get to. I think that's really important. It sounds okay. Well, we want to get something out there. I would always ask why. Why do you want to get something out there? Why do you feel like you have to do that? What's the challenge? And then therefore you're here, you want to get here, then that is kind of the best place to start. And I guess the flip of that is, it's okay if you don't have it all figured out yet. I always say to clients, like, you want to get it right. And that's kind of why you go through that strategic phase first. But if you wait until you're perfect, you'll never get there and you'll never do anything. So it's as much about communicating the journey, like, look, we know we've got a problem. Here's the stuff we're going to do about it. Here's how you can help. That's just as important, if not more powerful, than saying, look how great we are.
Yeah, I agree, actually, Jennifer, yes. Okay, well, as I say, I am very conscious of the time, so I don't think we'll go through any of the other questions live on the session. But as I say, we will answer them all individually once the session is over. So I hope you find it useful and you can take some practical advice into your own organisation and really start opening up your own digital channels to a much wider audience. I want to give special thanks to our panelists, Jennifer Pine and Robin Christopherson, for sharing their great knowledge and vast experience on this topic. Their contact details, if I just flick the slides along here, are on the screen now, if you'd like to reach out to either of them directly, or myself as well, of course. There's just one last thing that I would like to mention before we sign off. For all of our listeners out there, we're offering you the use of our web accessibility tool, Browsealoud, free for 90 days to really help support your online users during this global pandemic. If you'd like to know more, you can try it out for yourself. I've got a link now on the final slide. But as I say, you can contact me directly if you would prefer, and I can get it set up for you. But listen, thanks everyone for listening, and I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.